Your worlds are messed up. Your families are messed up. Addictions, secrets, problems. The Duffy household has their own issues too. So this is gonna take a look at Judah in a moment in time, right around when all this stuff is happening, just to help you realize the kind of person that Judah is, okay? And what I love about Scripture is if you and I had written it, a human being, we never would have put this kind of stuff in the Scriptures for everyone to read for all time. Like, this is the person that isn't on the picture above your mantle. It's the uncle you don't talk about, see? And this is what's weird about Scripture, is it like highlights these messed up people. Highlights them, actually brings them into the forefront and makes you look at them and deal with them and wrestle with what's going on there. Why would God use them? So let's check it out. Genesis 38. This is the fourth brother, Judah. At the time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hirah. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, whose name was She conceived again and gave birth to a son, and his name was Onan. She gave birth still to another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. So just back up, without even them going into it. You know how wicked you have to be for God to put you to death? You are a terrible human being. Terrible human being. Soulless human being. Dark-hearted human being. Chasing after anything and everything other than who God is. Just know that. And that sentence says a lot, okay? So then Judah said to Onan, this is the next brother, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. And we continue. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law, Tamar, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. Okay, so let's just pause. It's a weird cultural custom, okay? But this is what you basically have if you haven't caught it. You've got the oldest son. Now, the oldest son is the one who's going to probably receive a double portion of his father's will, okay? Because the oldest son's job is then to also then steward his father's stuff after dad passes away to everyone else well. So he, in essence, gets a double portion. He gets his part of the will, right, whatever that is, right, inheritance, and he'll get extra more than everybody else because he's also going to take care of everybody else in addition to whatever they're going to get in the inheritance. You with me so far? That's where it's getting legal, right? Okay, so you have the oldest brother. He's so terrible that God kills him. Well, now you have this woman that in the world, thousands of years ago, she's in a bad spot. She's already been married. She's not a virgin. She's not going to go to the university and get a high-paying job and make it all work out. That's not the society we're living in. She's in a bad spot in her future. She needs to have children. She needs to have heirs herself. But she has no husband. So now you have the second son, and he says, you need to sleep with her, have kids so that she has an heir. But he didn't do it. Okay, you notice that? Without me going back in and reading it again. He refused to do that, get her pregnant. Now, why did he do that? Well, here's why. Because if he sleeps with her and she gives birth to kids and sons, who becomes the heir to the will? The inheritance. Her sons. So you see what he's doing? By not getting her pregnant, he's ensuring, as the second son, that the dad's inheritance will come directly to him. You tracking? So the other problem is there's a third kid, a third son, but he's like way younger than the other two. And dad is already trying to figure out a way to make this one work out. So let's just pause on Judah. Father of the year. What's going on in that house? We already know in 37, it's his idea. Don't kill our brother. It's Judah that goes, hey, let's get industrious here. Okay, let's be kind of entrepreneurs, guys. Let's sell him. That's Judah. So that's the kind of brother he is. Here's the kind of father he is. He's killing it so much at home that the first son has to get killed. Second son, disobedient, his life is gone. And now his concern is that the third one isn't going to do much better than the first two. So now you have a picture of Judah, and it's going to get more and more into focus. First as a brother, this is the kind of person he is. Next, as a father, this is how he leads his home. Okay? All right. So, verse 11 is where we'll pick it up. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. Then Judah had recovered from his grief. He went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hirah, the Adullamite, went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that, though Shelah had now grown up, he had not been given to him as his wife. Okay? So basically what happened? Here's the third son. She's been waiting for the third son to secure her future by having children. But he's also super young, and now there's probably a 10 to 20 year whatever difference between them, who knows? And he's not interested. On top of that, him not being interested, what did dad do? Dad waited for his wife to die. So where's his accountability? Honey, remember the thing you said you would do? She's dead. That's what it just said. So now he's basically kind of went, you know what? I know I told you this, but now the only other person who knew, and now the only person that was going to hold me to it, she's died. So do you see now where this woman's at? She's desperate. So add that on to father-in-law of the year. Okay? Hung her out to dry. She's on her own. Okay? Here it is. So now she's gotten all dressed up. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. And what will you give me to sleep with you? She asked. I'll send you a young goat from my flock, he said. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? She asked. He said, what pledge should I give you? Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hand, she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend to the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman. But he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, where is this shrine prostitute who is beside the road to Enaim? There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here, they said. So he went back to Judah and said, I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said, there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, here's the twist, right? Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution. As a result, she's now pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. There it is. Drop the hammer, right? As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said. And she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah. And he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, this one came out first. But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, so this is how you have broken out. And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. What they're just saying is even in her womb, there's competition. No one plays nice in this family. If you didn't catch it, can you even believe this is in the Bible? It's nuts. So what did she do? She gets pregnant. She dresses up like a prostitute. She sleeps with Judah. Judah goes, I forgot all my stuff. And she took what was the basic equivalent of his ID. Give me your ID, I'll hang on to it, and then we'll meet up later for payment, okay? So she basically had the equivalent of his identification. He finds out she's pregnant. He's furious. He wants to burn her at the stake. She's just trying to look out for herself because now no one is. And so he's ready to kill her. And she goes, you know what? Just before you do, make sure that you get this back to this person. I can't remember who they were. Oh, that's right, it's you. So this is Judah. This whole story happens, sells his brother. He has one redeeming moment, like every great movie. You know those great movies where like the one character, he's a mess the whole time, but then he makes one decision where he saves the whole planet, and then we're all like, well, he wasn't such a bad guy, right? But he's just like a mess the whole movie, but the last 5 minutes, he saves planet Earth. He makes one good call. Well, that's kind of Judah. He makes one good call there at the end. He's like, listen, I'll trade places. Listen, Joseph, I'll serve in your court. We talked about that last week. He has one kind of blinking moment that looked kind of good, but otherwise he's a mess. And so finally, here's Jacob. He's at the end of his life, and he has all of his sons gathered around him. And what they do is he would then speak a blessing over them. And each one of the brothers gets a blessing. And now we get to Judah. And this is what Jacob would speak to Judah. Here it is. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. He's painting a picture of this blessing as though to say that there would be a preeminent power that would come from him, a great ruler that would come from his line. After all of this, it's so bizarre, but the blessing, this incredible blessing, this picture of this image of this person ruling and leading and power and coming through his family and prominence, of all people, is Judah. It's sort of cryptic, kind of crazy, right? Well, this is how this whole story now, after the blessing, you have Joseph with his brothers. His brothers are a little nervous about whether Joseph is going to turn on him. And Joseph brings in all his brothers real close, and he reminds them in Genesis 50, verse 20, hey guys, I haven't lost perspective on what happened here. I've forgiven you. We're reconciled. God was good. This is what God was doing. Incredible perspective. This is what he says in 50:20. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. He's reminding his brothers, you didn't send me into a pit and sell me into slavery. You didn't ruin my life. God sent me there. You may have intended my existence for harm, but God intended it for good. You may have had these intentions and this design and this plot and this scheme, but God, playing 4D chess, worked it in such a way that it ended up to actually save you. The saving of many lives. Here's what I want you to know. Number one, there's 3 takeaways from this whole thing. Who God would use. It's fascinating. Benjamin is the youngest brother of this whole story, if you recall. Saul, who would later become the Apostle Paul, whenever he is being imprisoned early on, he pulls out his Roman citizen card. And not only that, he reminds everyone that he is from the tribe and the lineage of Benjamin. So the Apostle Paul, all these years later in the New Testament, would descend from this youngest brother. That's the claim to fame right there. And it was greatly respected that that was Paul's lineage. And he brings that up, actually, at times in his ministry, right? Then you have Joseph. No one acts more like Jesus in a story than Joseph. Jesus doesn't come from Joseph. I mean, it would make sense to come from the guy that was patient, loving, kind, level-headed, respected, upright, flees from temptation, strong in character, compassionate, forgiving. No. Jesus is called the Lion of Judah. Jesus comes from the type of man whose family lineage already at this point has a prostitute in it. His lineage already now would come and descend from a man who's such a terrible dad, his kids would be taken out. A terrible father-in-law, an even worse brother. This is who Jesus would come through. So what does that tell you? I hope what it tells you is that God will literally use anyone to accomplish his purposes. It's not who you think is maybe the most enlightened or the smartest or the brightest or the most perfect. This guy is an immoral train wreck, and yet God would use him. And there's something to be said that God didn't come through Joseph. There's a reason. There's always a subtext. Why would Jesus do that? Why would God see fit to come through such a messed up family? Not to mention David, who would then sleep with his best friend's wife, and then kill his best friend. That's in that lineage as well. Let alone coming through a teenage, pregnant, unwed woman named Mary. His family tree is horrific. He comes to a mess to redeem a mess. He comes to a mess to reconcile a mess. He comes through broken marriages to heal marriages. He comes through broken families to heal broken families. He comes through broken people to forgive broken people. Because they can't be good enough. That's the message underneath the message. So don't think you're beyond the reach of God. Don't think your family members are beyond the reach of God. Don't think that you are beyond the grace and the mercy of God. You're not. This is what he would come through. There's a statement in that for all creation. I love 50 verses 20 because not even Joseph understood its implications. I'll read it one more time for you. God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. We all read that and we go, what? Well, that's great. He saved all the people that were starving several thousand years ago. Nope. Through Judah would come Jesus. But Judah has to live. Judah has to have someone smart enough to make sure he doesn't starve to death. It's amazing that God would spend 12 chapters focused on one person just to wait to the very end to go, and now Judah's the point. 12 chapters on this one person, just so you could see how important it was to save the line and lineage of this one person. Why? Because from him would come Jesus. And the saving of many lives wouldn't just be several thousand years ago. The saving of many lives would include the people in this room. And it wouldn't just be about meeting their temporal needs so they have something to eat and live from each and every day, but actually to feed them eternally for all eternity. That's what's really happening in that statement, forever. And here's what's really important, okay, is that with that idea of the gospel and what it is and what it isn't, we have to rightly differentiate that, okay? There's a lot of good things that are the result of the gospel. Marriages that are healthy, those are good things. Friendships, compassion, acts of service to your community, reconciling with brothers and sisters, being quick to forgive in your world and within yourself. Those are all good things when you see those things play out. But those are not the gospel. Those are the result and the effect of the gospel. The gospel is There is a problem between you and I and God. We have a problem, and nothing else will fix it. And the only one that can repair that relationship is Jesus. That's it. And he would come down to earth, suffer and die in our place, in your place and in mine, so that in simple childlike faith and trust in him, we would inherit eternity with him. Forgiven, slate wiped clean, forever. That's the good news. There's bad news and there's the good news, and they pair together beautifully. You have a problem. There's a separation between you and God made a way. All that other stuff, your church attendance, how things are going in your personal life, it's all great, it's all important. And don't get me wrong, if you're a horrible human being, it's hard for someone to meet you and see that your faith in Jesus is legit and real and genuine. It's all true. But that's not the gospel. The gospel message is that God made a way for you for the saving of many lives. And in this story, he would work through Joseph in such a way he would go to hell and back so that his family line and lineage of Jesus would be preserved, so that God could fix the very problem of the bad news, so that the good news would be applied to you for the saving of many lives for all eternity. There it is. Through Judah. Judah. That's who God picks. Judah. That's who God uses. So God will use you. God is reaching out to each and every one of us every single day by his grace. Whatever you're struggling with in these pews, don't buy the lie that it's about getting right and fixing you. First is understanding the need for that. And this story is just putting a highlight, magnifying the fact that when this is messed up and we realize this is messed up, that God made a way, and God would go to extreme lengths in the story and in the life of Joseph to make that possible. God would come through a mess to redeem a mess. And it would be years later that Jesus would literally be at the hands of people who are thinking from nothing but hatred. And it's amazing when you think about it, that God would not only come from a mess to redeem a mess, but God would use people's hatred in order to rescue and redeem them, possibly from their hatred. Think about that. So whatever your mess is, whatever's happening in your life, don't forget the depth of God's love for you, the depth of God's grace and mercy for you. Amen? Amen. And thus is the story of Joseph.